This is the YT Industries Decoy 29 Core 3, and this is the bike that's blown all of my preconceptions about this bike well out of the water, and so much so that I think this is one of the best all-mountain e-MTBs you can buy at the moment. To find out why, you're going to have to keep watching because this is the full review. Okay, so YT Industries touts the Decoy 29 as an all-mountain e-mountain bike. So it gets 29-inch wheels, both front and rear. There's 150mm of travel at the front and 145 at the rear. It's built around a carbon front end and a alloy rear end. This is to save a bit of cash at the expense of a bit of weight, but we're told that this rear end is just as strong as its carbon counterpart. So this bike gets all of the mod cons. So we have full internal cable routing and we've got pre-formed headset cups, and that's designed to balance the perfect weight to performance ratio. There is also a geometry adjusting flip chip which gives you half degree of adjustment of the angles, and there is frame protection both around the chain and seat stay, and it gets a special at-cross headset that limits the steering rotation, so in a crash it shouldn't knock your top tube or the fork shouldn't impact the down tube. So onto the geometry, and things are pretty interesting with this bike, and this is where some preconceptions crept in. So this gets a 463mm reach, and this is a large frame, and generally if we're talking all mountain we're thinking about 470mm reaching upwards, so compared to a lot of bikes this is definitely a bit short. But elsewhere in the lowest setting on the flip chip, we've got a 65.8 degree head tube angle, and that's a 77 degree seat tube angle. And another really interesting thing about this bike is that it's got quite a long chainstay. So this is a 458mm chainstay length. Again, if we're comparing to the Canyon Spectralon, for example, that's got a 440mm measurement. So back onto the frame a little bit, and each of these bearings around the pivot, they are sealed cartridge bearings, but they also get an additional seal to help keep water and other dust out to extend that bearing life. There's then a zero stack headset. So moving on to the motor, in this bike runs the ever popular Shimano EP8, so that kicks out 85 Nm of torque and 250 watts of power. And on this bike, as it's set up as it is, we've got a 540 watt-hour battery, but this can also be bought with a 720 watt-hour battery for an extra £900. And for the sake of this test, we have tested both batteries. But what is really cool is that this battery just isn't any off-the-shelf battery. It is designed especially for this bike with collaboration from YT. So in testing, I found it actually to be quite efficient. I've never really moved away from the 540 watt-hour battery, but I have ridden with the bigger one, and there's very little difference in terms of its effect on the handling. So with the bigger battery, it is a little bit more sluggish in the corners, but that's nothing to complain about given the bigger range it definitely gives you. Oh, and another really neat feature that I really enjoy is that the on switch is just underneath the down tube, so it keeps the cockpit that bit sleeker. And as with most bikes in YT's range, this one uses the V4L or virtual 4-link suspension kinematic, and that is designed as similarly to most others. So it's said to give you a soft and supple start of the stroke, a bunch of support in the mid-stroke, and a good bottom out resistance as you get towards the end of the stroke. And while I couldn't find it, this gets quite a high anti-squat figure to keep the shock well behaved under pedaling. So when compared to the Decoy MX, which is a more gravity-oriented build, this one gets a more linear leverage curve. And spec-wise, YT has not put a foot wrong, especially for the money. So at the front, we've got a Fox 36, it's e-bike specific one. It gets the Grip 2 damper, it's the Performance Elite model, so you've got all of the adjustment you'd ever want. At the rear, we've got a Fox DPS, which is a bit more simple, but it works really well. Something that you will notice is that there's very little own brand kit on here, which is making this bike look really good value for money. So the cockpit is supplied by E13, the wheels, they come from Crank Brothers, and it's a synthesis alloy e-bike specific wheel set. And the only thing that you will see as YT is the Postman dropper here, which comes in 170mm of drop on this large frame. As for the tyres, we've got a classic combo of the Maxxis Minion DHF at the front and a DHR2 at the rear, and they come with an EXO casing at the front and an EXO Plus casing at the rear. Elsewhere, there's a full Shimano SLX drivetrain, and that is paired with SRAM Kodar brakes. They're 4-pot calipers, and they've got 200mm rotors at both ends. Something I would like to note is that these are not the cranks that you'll get on this bike. I've had to swap them around for various reasons. I cannot remember off the top of my head what you will get with this bike, but it's not these. So on to the ride impressions, and as I said before, I won't lie, but I kind of thought this bike might be a little bit unstable, not so confident when going quick or doing some stuff that's particularly steep, but I was very, very wrong. This bike is just a hell of a lot of fun. So if we start off with how it climbs, it is an absolute monster up the hills. So because that reach is pretty short, the stack or the head tube length is only 95mm, and that long chainstay, again with this reasonably steep 77-degree seat tube angle, you just don't have to monitor it or worry about it up the climb. You just point it up and both wheels stay nicely glued to the ground, and you just winch up the climbs. And because it's not crazy long or anything like that, it's a really easy bike just to sit on and get well acquainted with very, very quickly. Then as we're seeing bikes with really short chainstays and super steep seat tube angles, this bike gets all its grip from doing basically the exact opposite. Again, this isn't ridiculously steep or ridiculously slack, it's basically the Goldilocks zone, but the long chainstay means that there's a lot of weight planted on that rear wheel, so you've got a ton of traction regardless of the climb that you're about to do. And then because of that high anti-squat figure, or whatever it may be, the suspension is really well behaved when you're going up a hill. There's very little bob present, but of course the performance of that shock or the suspension platform is watered down by the fact that you have a big old motor in there doing all the work for you. And just to comment on that motor, I'm a big fan of the EP8, especially this trail mode. I find it really reactive and super natural. It doesn't give you all the power instantly like other ones do, but yeah, I think it's a really solid choice for this bike. And again, so with this custom battery, it is super efficient. I've been able to do, you know, bigger rides on the 540 watt-hour battery and not really have to worry about the power level. Again, I have ridden it with the bigger 720 watt-hour battery. I've put in about 35k on a big climby ride, and I've been left with 2 bars of battery left. So handling isn't too shabby. It basically remains the same. You will just notice a bit more weight as you're tipping the bike into corner. And anyone who's ridden with an EP8 or a bike with an EP8 will know that it can be quite rattly, but that's not something that I've noticed on this bike. You know, YT has shoved a load of foam in there to kind of stop that from happening, and they've done a great job. So because this bike isn't terribly long, it absolutely devours the corners. This is one of the best cornering e-bikes I've ever ridden. Weight is so central, and regardless of that long chainstay, it feels super whippable. If you put it into a berm, it just rails it. You can absolutely, yeah, it's just a monster in the corners. Changing directions, you know, you've got the weight of an e-bike, but on this one in particular, I've had to rethink or remind myself that I am riding an e-bike that's 23 kilos. It feels super natural, and that quick cornering characteristic remains regardless of whether you're just hitting big old berms and flow trails or you're really navigating tight and twisty tech. It is an awesome bike to ride in the corners. But even though this bike's wheelbase is reasonably short, which gives it that great cornering, and that reach is short, which also helps towards that cornering, this bike utilizes its weight from the battery and the motor to rustle up tons of stability at speed. So when you're properly hauling, it's not twitchy. You can put a ton of confidence just going in a straight line and picking up tons and tons of speed. And that's what's really surprised me about this bike. You know, it is a bit more versatile than I first thought. And as I've mentioned before, this bike benefits from a more linear leverage curve, and I think that's a really great decision, a great design choice, because it keeps that rear wheel planted when you are absolutely hauling. So it kind of feels like you have a bit more travel than 145mm, but then you can reap the benefits of that little travel. So that's the increased efficiency and maybe a bit more of a playful ride. But yeah, when you are going through chunk, the rear end is nice and predictable, super supported, and it doesn't wallow in the corners, which is a massive benefit of this bike. But I will say it does take a little bit more work to get up into the air, because you don't have a load of mid-stroke support that you get with a more progressive kinematic. It's not something that I found was too much of an issue, but if you are looking to get airborne all of the time, you may want to look towards the MX build. But while this bike is an awesome all-rounder, it doesn't say that it's not without its limitations, and that is when you're doing proper steep descents. It's because it is a bit short and the head tube is so short itself, it doesn't have all of that confidence that you'll get if it was a bit longer, if the front wheel was a bit further ahead and you have the bars a bit higher. But that's not to say that this bike isn't capable of that. I mean, I've ridden it, it can still do it. That's when a bit of twitchiness comes into play, but again, it's still capable, it can still do it, and then it can still perform on easier flow trails. So it's still super versatile. But if you are doing steep and techie stuff all of the time, definitely take a look at the MX build, because that gets more travel, more progressive linear, more progressive curve, a slacker head tube angle, and it's a mullet build, so you've got more space to move over the rear end there. So moving on to the bike's value, and this bike will cost you £5,700, and yes, that is quite a lot of money. It's a big investment. But when you're buying this one, or this particular bike, you're getting a lot for your money. So you've got some pretty, like, not top end, but kit that's almost as good, but it will serve you for a long time and it performs fantastically. So if you do compare this bike's main competitor is probably the Canyon Spectral on CF9. So that's recently been updated and now gets 160mm fork, but the main thing is that it benefits from a full carbon frame. It will cost you £50 more than this bike, but the componentry on the Canyon just isn't quite as good. So you get a downgrade in drivetrain and suspension and the brakes. So again, that's proving that you're getting a lot of bike for your money here. Then if you move over to the High Bike All Mountain 7, that will cost you £5,600. And again, you're getting a full alloy frame then. And you're not getting as good suspension and the kit's just not quite there, but its geometry isn't too bad. We have tested the All Mountain 2, so be sure to check out that review. The specialized Turbo Levo alloy will cost you £5,500. Again, there's a full alloy frame and the spec just isn't quite as good as this bike, but you are saving £100. Horse for courses. So that is the YT Industries Decoy 29 Core 3, and one thing to take away from it is that it's super versatile, but it's just ridiculous fun in the corners. It can take on steep stuff, which is great. It's not the best at that, but it can offer a really welcoming, interesting and fun ride through most of the trails that you ever see in the UK. If I was to spend my own money, I'd buy one of these. So that is the full review of the YT Decoy 29 Core 3, and if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's because we have more bike reviews and first ride reviews on bikes, just like the recent Canyon e-bike lineup. As always, thanks very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.